Hello, Dan. Welcome to Talking Bollocks.
All right, mate. Nice to meet you properly.
Yeah, well, let's deal with that straight away, shall we? I messaged you because I've been chatting to Charlie, and he said, he mentioned you, and I was like, right, get you on, and then you surprised me by 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 reminding me that you played a track at the Glasgow show where on our comeback tour supporting Xentrix back in 2015, which will be 10 years in October, my friend.
Was that when it was? Yikes.
Yeah.
Because I think I played Crimes on stage with Xentrix twice. Once on the one your comeback tour, and I couldn't remember if that was around the time you released the comeback album, which was like what 4 years later or something like that. But yeah, that would have
Yeah.
been nearly 10 years ago. And I know this because I dislocated my shoulder horrifically like a few weeks earlier, and I could barely reach the first fret without being in excruciating pains. But,
Oh.
like the adrenaline gets you through, and yeah, that was a killer show because obviously that was Xentrix's comeback kind of time and your comeback time. So it was like a good day for British thrash making a bit of a
Well,
resurgence.
it was at the time, and then Chris left, left
I,
Xentrix, and it was like, oh right, okay, that was brief.
I
Um,
know they must have sat on that album for a good few years. I was wondering if the artwork had seen the light of day because they were selling shirts that I'd done for them, and I think they even gave me a little. I think in the after the gig had finished, the new songs were being blasted on the PA,
that's
and then
right,
they
yeah.
just for however long.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, bands, man. It's weird. But yeah, no, that was the original. Yeah, that was the original comeback show. So yeah, that would have been 10 years ago. I think it was. Yeah, well, it would have been because I think that's the last time we played with Xentrix, other than Glasgow a couple of years ago.
You're probably absolutely right. I think the years fly by a lot quicker now. But
Yeah.
so 10 years ago it feels like it's 5 years ago, but no, you're absolutely right. A long
Yeah,
time
no,
back.
that
I
that's
mean,
that's a thing without a doubt. If I think something was 10 years ago, it was 20 years ago. If I think it was 5 years, it was 10 years. It's just double basically.
well, even your last album, I think of that being recent, and then you look back and go, "Oh, it's 2019, 6 years ago." You're the
I
decades
know.
ago, and
I know, don't
yeah,
remind me. I mean, we're we've got 10 songs, but we've only got three of us at the moment, so we're yeah, we're slightly hamstrung. We're working on that situation, obviously. But yeah, it's I mean, okay, we had the pandemic in there as well, so that dragged out promoting the Age of Entitlement. But even so, it's like, yeah, it's ridiculous. I can't believe it's been so long. I mean, it's it took us less time from coming back. We came back in 2015 and we had an album out by 2019. Well, that was 4 years. It's like, shit, we've it's been a mess since, but we'll get there. Anyway, this isn't about us. It's about you. And yeah, I didn't realize you did the Xentrix artwork either. So my bad again.
I,
So you've been doing all their stuff since they came back.
yeah, pretty much. So for whenever, well, a very quick, long story cut short. Back in 2008 or 2009, I did a parody for when Metallica released Death Magnetic. I wrote this cover called Mastered by Muppets that was all about the loudness war and how stuff was being mixed really loudly.
Right.
Posted this on an engineering forum, the old Andy Sneap engineering forum, and through a collective bunch of us, Chris Astley ended up singing that nobody knows this because we didn't want to put him out there because obviously Q Prime and Metallica's might have come after certain people, and
Yeah.
I was nobody back then. I hadn't even started my art career, so I ended up working with the Xentrix guys before even working with the Xentrix guys. But then I later got to know Stan. Through Andy Sneap himself, and our relationship sort of began in probably the late 2010s. So I've been doing their stuff ever since, well, even before the comeback, because there was that sort of delayed little thing. But I
Mm.
mean, I was already a fan of Xentrix prior to working with them, so that was a real nice big honor to actually start getting the gig. And so Stan always comes to me for stuff these days, which is brilliant because well, it's my sort of music, my sort of, I love the For Whose Advantage artwork as well, as far as being a kind of classic thrash cover. So it's
Yeah.
nice to, in my slightly older age, be able to kind of contribute back to the bands that, I liked growing up.
that is a killer UK iconic cover for Whose Advantage. I absolutely love that.
Yeah. And it's a peak example, I think, of art that it could have been executed a little bit better, but not that much better. And it's just perfect for what it is. And that means all technicality goes out the window when you see a cover and go, oh, it's absolutely classic and it sticks with
Yeah,
you along. And that's always something I've been super into. Is something where you go, it feels iconic and memorable. You know, it's that blue sky with the glass sort of building backgrounds. You instantly see it and it brings you in. I mean, that's the whole reason I'm kind of into metal in the first place. Was the old Iron Maiden album covers where you see something and go, oh, well, I'm gonna just look at this for however long. But
yeah. I think that was and obviously to a certain extent, I'm sure it's not totally gone because it's still physical product and all the rest of it. But yeah, that whole side of things, that falling in love with, well, the whole concept of buying or listening to a band, um, or taking a risk on an album, having never heard them, is non-existent anymore. Those years went a long time ago. But to make that call, that judgment of I'm going to buy this based on purely the cover,
yeah.
um, I think I'm lucky to be part of a generation that remembers that feeling.
Yeah, I am exactly the same. And that was pretty much my life up until I guess even the 2000s. Well, the 2000s was when album artwork seemed to die a little bit and it went a bit on the Photoshop way. But I mean, I grew up with it in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s onwards. So, and at that point, I grew up in a small, I'm from England originally, but I moved up to Scotland when I was 10. I live in a small village. They got a W.H. Smith. They don't exactly have like the latest sort of Sepultura or whatever bands that you can think or obituary albums there. So you have to travel a bit further afield. And then you go, well, which one do I buy? You almost pick the one that you've heard of that's got the coolest cover and go from there. And that was how my process for buying loads of albums. And then even when it moved on to buying Kerrang and Metal Hammer, if it got a good review and the cover was good, it was like, well, that's what I'm going to buy next with the pocket money.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm glad I'm part of that same I'm exactly part of the same generation as yourself when it comes to that because it was really only when streaming services and being able to listen to any music or the internet, I guess, just any music for free instantly meant that I guess you could check it out a little bit before you
yeah.
actually buy, which has pros and cons. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely benefits of it both ways, but there was that magic of buying something and going, please be good, please don't be shit. And when it cost 17 quid for a CD or whatever it did, which, back then.
Well, I was talking to Charlie about this. We were both saying that it's like it was that buying something, and like I'm not sure if I like it, but I've invested a lot of money in this, so I'm just gonna have to keep playing it until I like it. And if you didn't do that, it was then right, try and swap it with somebody who had heard it or was aware of it or liked it or wanted it, and trying to get something back from them. Um,
Yeah.
Mad.
And unfortunately for me growing up, there wasn't very many people that I knew that actually liked the same sort of music. I managed to get a few people in the Metallica and Megadeth like friends over the years, but by and large, I was like pretty much the only one who was into, I'd say, extreme metal from about the age of 10 or 11 at school. So definitely I had to go through I'm going to keep listening to this and until I like it. And there was
Yeah.
definitely, I remember my dad brought me back Anima by Tool in the probably the late 90s. And that's not
Wow.
really, it's not music for how old would I have been? Maybe 14 or something at the time, because it's quite
Yeah.
intense. I was
Yeah.
like, well, this is my present. I've asked him to bring me this back. I like the first track on my first listen. And then after about 30 listens of playing it over and over again, it clicks, and then you love the band and buy every one of those releases. And
Yeah.
we don't really quite have that degree of perseverance, I think, anymore.
But
Even
that's
the
a
old.
that is a hell of a deep album to be listening to at 14 and trying to get your head around it.
That's it. Well, I mean, my cousin John, who was a couple of years older than me and lived in London, he got me into the likes of Cannibal Corpse and Slayer and Machine Head, in 94, like 93, 94, when I was only about 11. So I was chucked in at the deep end. It was kind of I'd heard of Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden because they were sort of in the charts in the early 90s. So
Yeah.
Knocking on Heaven's Door and Be Quick or Be Dead. And even Enter Sandman you'd occasionally see it on the top of the pops or something. And then my cousin was just like, oh, here's a bunch of loads of cassettes. And you discover And Justice for All, The Bleeding by Cannibal Corpse, and Machine Head's Burn My Eyes, which had just come out. And by that stage, there wasn't that much further you could go at that time, short of getting
Yeah.
into like the early Napalm Death or something, which is more, it's not necessarily more extreme, it's more noisy, I suppose, it's more raw, because a lot of the music that I got into was very heavy, but well produced at least. There was almost nowhere to go. So it set that bar for extreme music. So from then on, I guess you had a pretty open mind to anything, for me anyway, whether it
Yeah.
was prog or thrash or death or what have you. And you just, and there was, because I wasn't involved in any scenes because other kids weren't into it. I wasn't really biased by anything. And I always feel that was worked well in my favor, because it meant I never grew up going, oh, I'm not going to listen to this because it's not cool or you don't think it's cool. Because literally everything wasn't cool in that era of mid 90s. I mean, I'm sure you probably remember it well for maybe different reasons, as being maybe like the death of thrash and what have you. Whereas,
Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
went into, sorry, only go.
it's a weird one because uh I've said this recently, and I've said this many times. A lot of people maintain that thrash didn't die. It did. Well, if it didn't die, it went into a coma. There was, people trying to keep it alive. But funnily enough, just going back to something you said a little earlier, rather than talking about, the so-called death of thrash, personally, for me, the place where you can pinpoint the rebirth and why thrash is where it is now is largely down to one, well, to one individual, and that's Rob Flynn, because Machine Head is and I'll argue till I'm blue in the face. You can say what you like about Rob, and you can say what you like about some of the albums he's put out, Burning Red, etc. But you can trace back the resurgence of thrash metal to Burn My Eyes, and a lot of bands then waking up to, oh, right, that's cool again, is it? And without a doubt, he deserves his flowers for that, because I think it was a game changer.
Yeah, and he kind of did it again, maybe almost 10 years later when The Blackening came out. Although there was,
I disagree purely because I think that album's a slab of shit.
but what I was going to say was, like, I don't necessarily mind it, but I'm completely from the Burn My Eyes sort of point of view. But what I was going to say was, what Rob Flynn did there was almost see the likes of Bullet for My Valentine and Trivium, bands who grew up on Machine Head, playing kind of like old Machine Head, that he was then almost trying to keep up with the kids again. Metallica have almost done it a little bit. So all I wasn't necessarily giving him credit for rebirthing thrash. It was more that I think I remember in the mid 2000s, proper metal came back in again with like guitar harmonies and guitar solos. And it was kind of off the back of, not that was Bullet from a Val. I listened to a bit of Bullet from a Valentine and Trivium and all that at the
Yeah,
time, because it was in there. But people actually started playing guitar harmonies and solos again, for better or well, I think for better in general, whether it came from those bands. And I remember the new metal era, like what, years previous, that I was obviously a part of, being my age and growing up and being involved in a band scene. I never played new metal myself, but it was everywhere. And then I suppose even the likes of the metalcore guys like Killswitch Engage and Unearth came along in that early 2000s and finally brought back good guitar music and Iron Maiden style harmonies, and solos weren't uncool anymore. So I've got fond memories of that shift again in the early to mid 2000s when, and again, it doesn't really matter whether you hate the Blackening or not. It objectively has guitar solos on it and isn't new metal like the previous two disasters were. And it was
yeah.
just nice. We kind of got out of that rut and back into, yeah, a bit of playing again that inspired the next wave of kids. And it's sort of seemingly we've been into guitars and guitar solos for about 20 years, which is where, my love is, I guess.
Yeah,
And
no,
riffs.
and me too. By the way, I love the way you navigated around new metal. I was around. I mean, I didn't play any. I like I've been in the room while people have done the heroin, but I haven't done it myself. You know, um,
Just so I don't sound elitist, I will say there is a lot of bands from that era that hold a special place in my heart because
Me
it
too.
reminds me of a place of time.
I
I will never shit on some of the better Limp Bizkit or whatever songs and records at the time. Had great production, fills a dance floor. I just never played it myself, but I
Well,
did.
dude,
Yeah.
I went to see Korn when they were signed, when they were supported by an unsigned act called Limp Bizkit. So yeah, I was there, and I love those first two or three, even Untouchables from the Korn catalog gets, and I've been into stuff later on in their career as well. But anyway, talking of careers. What really got you started? Is there a kind of is there a and I did that and everything changed moment, or like most people, is it just like you do one, you do two, you do three, and all of a sudden you go, oh right, okay, I'm doing a lot of this at the moment.
Yeah, I can probably. There's a sort of few really important points. One is since the late 90s, I started playing guitar in the late 90s, so I've played in bands since then, and I really got into recording just in general. You start off with the crappy little 4 tracks and 8 tracks, and around that time, I noticed that Andy Sneap and Colin Richardson's name would appear on all the albums that I'd love. So I'd
Absolutely, yeah, yeah,
buy albums if their names were on it. So then I was in a few bands and they started to get a little bit better and I started to get into the recording side of things. And then by the mid to late, and I always did artwork for my own bands, just or the odd local band, but nothing seriously. And then in the mid to late 90s, I was very heavily involved on Andy Sneap's audio engineering forum, where I learned everything about Pro Tools and recording and miking up a cab, mostly to help my own band. But then my own band's kind of dissolved, and I had nothing to contribute to all the people who knew way more than me from an audio engineering point of view. So I did funny things. It's probably not necessarily overly PC now, but like I came up with the concept of Metalaban, which was just Metallica Photoshop to look like Al Qaeda, or mastered by Muppets, sort of parodying the mixing sort of thing.
yeah,
Just the artwork stuff. Nothing malicious. Just having a little bit of joke about Metallica,
yeah,
who long been my favorite band, and I've always sort of punched up with comedy stuff. Anyway, long story short, Andy himself saw some of my Photoshop work, and he just rebooted the band Hell, which was a band that he'd grown
yeah.
up loving and played in. And he was desperate for an artist to do it. So he's like, I'll give this guy Dan from the forum a shout. And I couldn't believe it because he was literally, one of my heroes. And I used to buy records because of him. And then I did the first Hell record. And then from that, I kind of got jobs like Accept and Xentrix sort of through him. Then other
Right,
audio engineers on the forum would kind of give me a shout. And I worked with Sylosis as well for a couple of albums because they were just a really small band back then. And Josh was a bit similar to me, just a bit of a music nerd who'd appear on the forum and try and learn stuff for his own band. And almost every single thing I've done from there since 2010 about can be pinpointed to that. And then you create a new friendship.
oh
Like
yeah,
for example,
yeah,
and then what happens. So Scott Atkins as well, who was in Stamping Ground. I don't know if you're familiar with Scott's
yeah,
work. I got to know him through Andy as well. And then he'd be working on a new Cradle of Filth album and go, oh, Dan, Cradle need to help out with some graphic design. Can you work with them? So all of a sudden you get to know those kind of people. And it all just sort of starts with relationships. And then I've
yes,
got a whole, but yeah, I'm so happy to be part of the Floridian death metal scene because I love that. And that all happened because one of those bands saw my artwork for Xentrix, and then all of a sudden you get your claws in there, and then it spreads like wildfire. So yeah, it's just a domino effect, really. But yeah, it basically you can pinpoint it back to the first Hell album I did for Andy that came
right.
out in about. That's the sort of crux where it all just went from there.
But I mean, you know, when you suddenly start doing stuff for somebody, and then it kind of snowballs as people get past your name, etc. That's that's kind of classic any kind of entertainment, any sphere of entertainment. It's like, right, okay, there's this guy, great, let's use him. And funnily enough, I do a show called Old Bollocks, uh, which I do with a friend called Stephen over in the States, and uh, we do a video of the podcast as well. He launches that on his YouTube channel, and we were talking about the cover art because I was talking about, sorry, should have uh, Tiktaalica is what I was reviewing at the time, and he was looking it up because he hadn't heard of it, and he was looking the cover art up, and he was like, "Man, I love this cover art." It's like if that's not Ed Repka, then of course I didn't know then it was Ed Replica, um,
Yeah.
and he was like, "Oh man, that's awesome," and it is worth mentioning that it's just the right side of a tribute to Scream Bloody Gore. Uh, I absolutely love it. It's fantastic.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, it really was meant. My default style has always been kind of Ed Replica, a tier below because I grew up like his artwork for Megadeth and Death is my and a ton of other bands as well, but those have been the famous
Yeah,
ones. Just my absolute favorite and what I grew up on and what I always wanted to do. So I've just always drawn as close to that ever since I was about 13 or 14 years old. But with this one, Charlie really specifically said, I want it to look like a kind of a long lost thrash metal record from 1991. And we were like, well,
yeah,
how can we kind of make it look a bit like all of those early Death and Megadeth albums? Not that you're ripping off any one of them, but
yeah,
just that it sort of slot in a little bit to that vibe and people would go, oh yeah, that's sort of one in the series. So it was
yeah,
very much the aim. And a big departure from his first album, which is totally and
yeah,
utterly different and not
yeah.
recognizably me, I suppose, it's a lot more Roger Dean-esque. So it's like, yeah, it's like a sort of
Yes.
slightly death metal version of a Yes album cover, which I, it's fun as well, but not what I typically do.
No, no, I agree. It looks like there's a woolly mammoth is about to hove into view on that one, but doesn't quite make it. Um, but yeah, no, it's those that era that that we've been talking about and that you mentioned there is absolutely spot on. And like I said, it's just the right side of Scream Bloody Gore where you're just going like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, I
Would
like that. Now, presumably, people know what you do, they like what you do, so they approach you for something specific. They know what it is that they want. Is is that always the case, or is it because I'm very involved in the art side of what we do. Um, Either it's an idea of mine or it's a concept of mine, and I've always been lucky enough to be left to get on with it, even back in the day and this time around as well. But I know that so for some bands, it's just like even coming up with an album title is difficult. Never mind, like the idea of a cover. So I presume it's quite a spectrum of what you end up dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in my early days, people used to work with me largely because of versatility. Because I'd say, like, I can do a whole bunch of different, I wouldn't quite say jack of all trades, master of none, but definitely I'd say being broader as opposed to really good at one specific thing
Can I just
was,
jump in there? Can I just jump
yeah.
in there? That is actually it's one of my favorites. That's actually a positive quote that we in Britain have actually we've changed it to mean it slagging people off. The full quote is better to be a jack of all trades and a master of none.
All right.
Yeah, so it is actually a positive quote, but us in Britain we've dropped the better bit and we've he's a jack of all trades. Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
one of those long lost ones where half of the metaphor is missing and it doesn't mean the same as anyone. Like the whole flattery, the flattery quote as well is another classic one. But
yeah,
yeah, somewhere in between that, where it's like, anyway, quite adaptable to a bunch
yeah,
of different. So in the early day, it's like, oh, can you just do as a cover, sort of either in this style or that style? And I'd sort of dip around. But over the years, I eventually like, and then if thrash and death metal bands never came to me and asked me for stuff, I'd never have an opportunity to do the sort of stuff I really liked.
yeah,
But you build up enough of that. I think I'm in the position now where people largely come to me to ask me to do the art that I want to do rather than say,
yeah,
oh, we've seen your 15-year body of work. How about you do something that, you haven't done on there. They'll just go to somebody else. But as far as the actual what I'm asked to do, I often get more detail briefs than a hi Dan, I have no idea what I want. Could you
Yeah,
just draw something? And I think this is because I've always put tons of Easter eggs and references in my art, which comes from a love of Somewhere in Time, the Maiden album with all of the little bits on. But even
yeah,
when I was at university, I did architecture at university, and even in all my projects, I'd stick like the DeLorean from Back to the Future or the A-Team van or my tutors in like drawings just for my own personal amusement. So
yeah,
ever since I've done stuff, I've loaded things with references, whether it's a callback to something out with the band, a nod to previous albums, just anything that means that the person on the other end, whether it's the band or the fans, go, "Oh, I get this joke. I get the whole point
yes,
of."
yeah,
So I've kind of almost found myself as being like the Easter egg guy in terms of I don't think I've ever seen other people's artwork. So like say what you want about the quality or anything of my art. I don't ever think I've seen as other artwork that's loaded with different references to stuff before. So a lot of time bands will come to me and go, "Oh, here's all a bunch of stuff that means X, Y, and Z to us. Can you put it on the shelves in the background?" And then you can get extremely detailed briefs, which I don't
yeah.
mind because it's often easier to work with people who know what they want rather than they they
Oh,
they
absolutely.
yeah, they know what they don't want, and it's that, which is really
Yeah,
tricky. So, and you'll probably know this yourself as a sort of creative type. It's often hard to come up with that initial idea, but if somebody gives you a spark, you can run with it. So I always
yeah,
like for somebody to give me their ideas, and then I can sort of just get involved in it. And it's like it's the collaborative process that
yes,
is that's so fun about creating music or art. Rather than just coming up with your own ideas. Like I always like as from a music point of view, I always enjoyed working with other people, even if they had a slightly different point of view of me, just because something in the middle would be completely fresh, as opposed to if I just use my own ideas, it's gonna sound like everything that I've got in my head. And I don't know, there's something about mixing different little people's ideas into your own that creates something a bit original and keeps it fresh, I guess. So
I totally agree. I mean, I mean, a huge album cover for me as a kid was "Script for a Jester's Tear" by Marillion by Mark Wilkinson, who I was lucky enough to get to do our last album, which was a lovely kind of, you know, completing that circle. And and basically, there's all sorts of Easter eggs in the cover in the full gatefold sleeve, where you can pick out references to songs, and there's also hidden skulls in there, which is very metal, but it kind of wasn't on a Marillion cover. Um, and I was from that point on, I was always looking for the hidden, the hidden messages, the hidden little bits and pieces in covers, in artwork anywhere. That's always been one of my one of my big things is trying to hunt down those little nods to songs that may be on the album. Sometimes it's a lyric, whatever it is. But that's yeah. When it comes to artwork, that is one of my absolute favorites. So whether or not that's because of we've grown up with those, with people doing that, and that just it just carries on. And then to have the guy who now does Iron Maiden and did Marillion back in the day doing our album cover was just like, yeah, that's a life goal ticked right there.
it's amazing. Yeah, I'm exactly the same, and I think it probably stems from that the point of view of you've spent all this money on something, you want to get your money's worth and enjoyment's worth out of the music and the artwork. And so when
Yeah,
you've got it on your headphones or your stereo, you want to be spending time poring over the details and it because you just get so much more value. Because I've always viewed the music and the art as kind of equally important. Like a great
yeah,
example. few Megadeth records that are the best in the world, and then there's a few that I love but don't necessarily have the best artwork. And I always think I'd probably view them as in just as higher esteem if it had the artwork to match, maybe.
The
But
one
just
the one that springs to mind, especially now you mentioned Megadeth, is the for me the marriage of shit artwork and shit album, Euthanasia. It's just
yeah,
like, well, that is outstandingly bad.
see, I grew up in that came out in '94, and I have a real soft spot for euthanasia. But what I will say is this will probably be a slight generational difference because there won't be
Yeah,
that. Because I was 11 when that came out, and I didn't grow up with thrash in the late 80s, early 90s. So you just get everything bombarded to you at the time. So I've
absolutely
always
get it. Yeah.
one of those things where I'm sure it's like the people like my dad's generation who hated the 80s production of massive synths and snare drums and all of that. Whereas I love it because it was like the cartoon theme tunes to my youth. So there's definitely that thing where I fully understand that somebody who is 5, 6, 10 years older than me would despise that level of stuff. But I've got a very quick story relating to both Charlie and Mark Wilkinson that is only a minute long. I just
Oh,
recently
right. Now this I've got to hear. Do tell me.
Right. So I've done the last couple of Haken albums, well, the live album, including the live album that was released or announced, sorry, about a week ago. And, like anybody who puts out any form of art into the public, you kind of keep an eye on the comments just to see if anyone thinks it's rubbish, because you can learn from criticism as much as anything. But
Yeah.
it mostly seemed to sound well. But there was one comment from a guy that went, this is the worst live album cover I have seen since Marillion's one with Fish. And I was like, I'm going to go and check this out to see how bad this guy thinks my
Oh,
artwork
I
was.
I bet I know which one he's referring to.
What's it called? Right. I
It
can't remember. It
is
had
it
this
the
air.
is it the thieving magpie?
Yeah, something like that.
And
And it's
and
a,
it's basically an airbrushed version of the band. It's not the band. It's an airbrushed version of the band.
that's it. Now, given my love for all things 80s like that, and knowing that it's Mark Wilkinson who's done some brilliant stuff, I thought, you know what? I will absolutely take that if somebody thinks that because airbrushing is unbelievably difficult to do. And
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for those kind of covers again from sort of the era that I grew up in. So I thought, like, if I'm going to be compared to something really bad by somebody, I thought, well, I'd much rather have it be that than something that I personally think is complete utter garbage. But it was just it was just as you mentioned that
Yeah.
because Mark Wilkinson did a bunch of the Judas Priest stuff, I think, as well. Did he? Am
Yeah,
I
he
right?
does. He does that. He does Maiden. Yeah, it was brilliant because he was doing Fish's final album, Judas Priest 50th anniversary, the Maiden stuff, and then Acid Rain. And it was like it was literally like it was like the old Only Fools and Horses thing, New York, Paris, Peckham, with
Yeah.
obviously Acid Rain being Peckham. Um, but yeah, now as regards yeah, the worst. Did you do Fauna then?
I did Fauna. Yeah, I did Fauna as well. Yeah.
That is stunning. That is an absolute.
Cheers.
That, by the way, for those of you who don't know, that is Haken's most recent studio album. That's absolutely stunning, dude.
Thanks. That was because that was a totally, again, a very different one for me stylistically. But I think
Well,
apart
yeah.
from
Hence, I didn't realize you'd done it.
yeah. Well, because you can't do the thing that I would, I'm not doing zombies getting their heads ripped off and that for Haken. And I think the rest of the guys in Haken, I've got to become friends with them all these days, but I'm pretty sure they would have been a little on the apprehensive side to use me when Charlie was originally like, oh, let's look, Dan's done my solo on cover. Let's do this. And like, is that going to work with us? But Charlie
Yeah.
said, no, look, he doesn't just do this. He can do other stuff. And Haken, as a very quick aside, have been my favorite band since 2016. Like, I mean, I grew up on Metallica and Megadeth and a whole host of other bands, in my youth. But since for about the last 10 years, Haken have been my favorite current band. So to eventually work with them was an absolute dream come true. But it did mean it's like,
Brilliant.
right, I have to, and they have their previous albums had a very much a graphic design style cover of art.
Yes. Very,
And
very dominated by the logo.
that's right. And this, I was thinking, well, what are we going to do? Because I generally like really busy, complicated, hand-drawn style stuff. Will this work with them? Because purely from a fan of the band, I don't ever want to put something that other fans would dislike out. You know, it's like there's plenty of bands out there that I like that I don't think I'd be the best fit for them because what I like doing isn't how they like to put themselves out there aesthetically. So I'm fine with that. And I thought, would I be able to do Haken? But that cover went down really, really well with people. My parents have got a framed print of it on their living room wall, bless them, which is really nice. And
Well, that's really cool. And I have to say, you know, you can't go wrong with a monkey.
yeah,
You just
exactly.
can't. You can't. There's like monkeys and dolphins. People are not going to go, "Oh, fucking hate that." It's like, well, you're a wanker. It's dolphins and monkeys. You can't go wrong. Just make people smile.
Well, this is it, and I definitely come from that sort of thing. And you'll know this with sort of a bit of a comedy background as well. It's like if you can make people enjoy stuff, it doesn't have to cheapen it by being either funny or whimsical or whatever. But there's always a way of making something that is enjoyable and makes you happy and smile that doesn't necessarily cheapen or turn it into a joke. And there's definitely, I
Absolutely.
mean, you could if someone said, "I'll do a Victorian monkey on a smoking jacket that looks like Hugh Hefner." It's sat in front of a wallpaper. Descriptively, it could be absolute garbage, but sometimes when it all works out into play, everything comes together, and you go, actually, that's all right. You know,
Well, when you actually just put that into words, I thought that sounds shit.
sounds terrible, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. It's the fine line. It's the fine line between, I guess, because I didn't come up with that concept whatsoever.
No, but if
It's the fine.
somebody gives you that concept, it's like instantly, just putting it through my head. If somebody gives me that concept, I'm just thinking that's a shit idea, right? That's I'd rather have no idea. Just let me come. But as a provider, as a facilitator of making that vision come to life, it's not a case of judging the idea. You've got to go straight to how do I deliver that? How am I going to make that real? How am I going to make that cool? You know, and you've got to start instantly working on the not judging the idea, making the idea happen. And that's pressure.
Absolutely. And I've definitely learned to trust people's ideas. And I very rarely go into something thinking, oh, that's a crock of shit. I normally think, oh, I wouldn't have come up with that. How can we do it that is a way that's palatable to myself and to other people? And that's kind of the fun challenge, really, because as much as I love drawing replica style melted people in toxic waste to sort of put to
Including Arnie walking around having killed a load of people.
exactly. I mean, that is what I love doing. But if I just only did that, you can box yourself into a certain
Oh,
stereotype
yeah.
and sick of it. And that's the point you start phoning in and treading on the same things that you've done 1,000 times over. Whereas getting to mix it up a little bit definitely really helps. And it means that you then also really enjoy it when you go back to doing the stuff that kind of the default setting, I guess.
And also, I think that that variety also stops you. Well, not stops, but it helps you combat the criticism of, oh, look, it's another Goldsworthy Ed replica job where and it's like, well, firstly, that must have been what the band's asked for, and secondly, you can point to other stuff and go, well, yeah, it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything.
Exactly. Because the
Did
thing is, even
did that last Haken album open any doors for you as well? Because presumably that takes you to a completely different marketplace.
um, probably not from a artistic point of view, probably from a other people knowing who I was point of view, because I love my prog, but I haven't.
Next Dream Theater
I,
album, mate.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love Dream Theater, but then I kind of, from train of thought onwards, disappeared off the map. But the last few have been stuck in my head, and I'm
Same here.
really
Same
so.
here. Train of Thought is that's a that's a hell of an album, and in fact, it's so good you can only disappoint after that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's it. And they went through a sort of, and it felt like Dream Theater by numbers for the best part of 2 decades. But I've really enjoyed the last three albums. And the tester for me, and this is true with any album, if you put it on and then go, I'm going to put it on again, versus getting halfway through and going off and then barely ever revisit it. So I've been enjoying that. But I mean, you see with all their covers, I mean, Dream Theater being the flag bearers of prog metal, I suppose. It's very much photo montage style stuff rather than painted artwork. So I've not really been approached. I guess the classic prog bands of the 70s and 80s was all very much hand drawn, but 90s prog metal onwards hasn't really gone down the, I guess, the sort of art route that I've done. So I've not really done much beyond Haken off the top of my head in terms of other prog bands. But at
yeah,
the same time, my most of my stuff doesn't get voted for album cover of the year or any of that kind of thing, probably because it's just a worse version of what Ed Repka has done far better for far better albums. Like, you
a
can't.
little harsh.
Well, but I mean, no matter how I could do the best thing ever, and it still isn't going to be good as Rust in Peace or Peace Cells or Leprosy or Scream Bloody Gore, just because those are just classic albums and classic album artworks. They're so iconic. You just can't beat that. But stuff like Haken gets, I think, probably a bit more praise because it's a bit more original, a bit more unique. So I saw
Yeah.
that one pop up all over the shop for in album covers of the year here and there, which is lovely to see. And it certainly doesn't bother me if I never get voted for them. But it's really funny that when you finally do something that's totally different than what you normally do, people seem to prefer it. But
Yeah, yeah, and
you know,
one thing I'd like to talk to you about is your actual sort of physical process. And let's take Fauna by Haken, for instance, because that is an incredibly complex piece of work. Um, does that, how does that start out? I mean, does that start out just sketching, drawing, and does that then translate onto, right, okay, I'm going to use, you know, Photoshop, whatever. How does it?
I mean, everything for years. I grew up drawing traditionally, as most people do, but for the last, I don't know when it's how long it's been. I do everything digitally, just drawn on my iPad or drawn on a tablet in Photoshop and Procreate, which you kind of need to do, I think, when you've for the ease of edits, because in this world that we
Yeah,
work in, if somebody goes to you, oh, actually, I wish it was the sky was blue, you can't suddenly click your fingers and turn a painting around in however long. But the process that I've applied has always tried to be as close to how I would draw traditionally as possible. And I don't think I could paint fauna actually as a painting anyway, given all the time in the world,
yeah.
just because it's almost two album covers in one. Like, so I did the wallpaper that goes on in the background, that jungle artwork, as a
Ah, right.
completely different piece, which took ages in its own
Yeah,
right. Then I drew the rest of the scene, and then, behind the monkey and behind the paintings and what have you, I'll piece it all together. But at some point in the creative process, I will just sort of flatten it down to one piece and then just keep painting over it again and again and again because it gives a more traditional look. Because I will, I'm a digital artist, I guess, but I work at a very my love comes from working traditionally and my love of all the traditional things. So I try to keep my process as minimal as possible, just using a few different types of paint brushes and no photoshopping or textural work because my early stuff I did occasionally go, oh, I need to look this like a concrete wall. Let's just get some concrete texture and put it over. But I never really liked the look of it. So now if I do something that's rusted metal or concrete or whatever it is, I'll always hand render it because that is what I like the look of myself, really, just
yeah,
from my point of view. Um, and I used to start off all my covers in as a pencil sketch and often a bunch of pencils and put them together. But it's just so much easier to sit in front of the TV and have a TV series on, or sit in my front of my computer and have music on and work that way. But my goal for a few years' time would be to get the sort of paints back out, which I haven't done in years, and give it a crack to see if I can sort of paint like that. But I haven't really done that since school because it's just not. convenient because the cost of doing it, the time, the lack of editing, having a 2 year old or a 7 year old kid, because I've got a couple of, young kids coming in and just going, oh, what's this? Rip. Like it just everything is just so much more convenient to be to be done digitally, really. So yeah,
Yeah.
Photoshop, Procreate, and you kind of just get into a you just get into a bit of a workflow, really. And that's definitely thing since I went full time doing this 3 years ago. That is the biggest change I found is just having an understanding of how I'll I work. And it's always do a very rough sketch, give that to the band, which just looks kind of crap. Get the approval for that, then go and do a better sketch over the top of that just to see
Mhm.
if it's board, and then just paint it down properly, just going over it layer by
So
layer.
basically getting stages of approval.
Pretty much, yeah. And then after a point, if they like it, at the concept and the composition is always the key. Because if they like that, you can change the icing at the end. But if somebody goes, oh, actually, I wish that guy was like dancing and jumping around rather than just sitting there, you go, oh, I can't do anything with that. That
Yeah.
is the main thing. So I'm always more confident if they say, oh, I love that sketch, just do that. I'm I can go into the rest of it being pretty happy and then if you do need to change colors or add in a detail here or there, that's fine because you can those are tweaks that you can manage, whereas you can't
Yeah.
suddenly just flip the
Well,
concept.
speaking of which, I'm now thinking of this. I'm now thinking of the project and edits and charges for edits, etc. So, do you get given a budget to start with, and you're like, right, I've got to work within the constraints of this budget, or or are people just going to say, right, you know, deliver it to us and charge it incrementally or give us a ballpark for what you think it's going to cost. So presumably again project by project it's different, or then you'll get some band that come up to you and say, look, we've got X amount of cash, can you even do anything for that?
Yeah, most of the time, actually, they say, how much does it cost? And I've got a fairly flat rate. And sometimes
Right.
you'll do 100 hours work, and sometimes it'll only be 50 or 60 hours work for a cover.
Right.
But I kind of view that sometimes I'm mugging myself off by working far too hard for not the amount. And then other times some jobs are a little bit quicker. So unless somebody comes to me, which is very rare, but occasionally happens and said, this is my budget. What can you do for this? Um, I kind of just have a flat fee that has gone up a little bit over the years. But I kind of hate the money side of things because I got into it for the love of it. And I almost
Yeah.
feel embarrassed to charge for my art at all, even though I obviously do because it's my job and it pays the bills and it is now my full-time job. But for years and years, it was just my hobby that I would do on top of a day job. And
Yeah.
as a kid, I'd sit in my room for hours and hours with the colored pencils out. And it was a love first. And I always said I never went to art school because I didn't want to be an artist because as soon as you become that, you have to compromise for money. And I never wanted to do what other people told me. I wanted to do what I thought looked good, at least a sort of
Yeah.
style.
So
Um,
mentally you're still kind of struggling with the I'm ripping people off by charging them. Do you know what I
a
mean? It's
little
just
bit
yeah,
mental.
a little bit of that because there is that feeling that, but I enjoy this so much. It's kind of wrong to charge for it. It's not. You're a human being. You're an adult. You understand it's a business. You got to pay the mortgage. You got two kids, etc. But there is still that 16-year-old that goes, but wouldn't you be like, isn't this your dream? Just doing this all day?
Exactly. The hardest thing for me, I think, has been having to learn my own value, really. And
Yeah,
again,
that's
you
a
have
tough
to,
journey.
really is. And after doing it professionally, when you have to earn money, that is the point when it definitely became okay, I need to be a bit more serious about that side of things. But I'm still probably the most relaxed person ever when it comes to this. I do so many things you shouldn't do as an artist, like, don't worry about a deposit, like let's go on faith. And that is never do that to any other artist listening. You should always take a deposit. But I've always kind of worked on a trust basis and built up really good friendships with bands. And the downside is half the people I work for are mates. And I think, well, I can't put my prices up for these guys. Friends now. And
Yeah,
so you have a bit of a delayed period where you put it up for them because you have to over a period of time. But you're
yeah.
absolutely right, Howard. I'm 42, but I feel like a 16-year-old still in terms of my
It
attitude.
doesn't change me. I'm 54, and that doesn't change. It just doesn't. But and I think that comes with being a creative, because ultimately what you're doing is fulfilling the inner child's dream, and hence that just keeps you feeling that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really nice to speak to somebody who's sort of close enough to me in sort of age and interest, but also a bit more experience to know that it never changes. Because I kind of figured that if I'm like this in my 40s, then I'll be like this in my 50s. I'll still be listening to death metal when I'm older and grayer. But yeah, I'm also really happy to be of the position where, despite having worked with an awful lot of big bands, it hasn't changed me who I am because I think there's bigger, it's not, you can only ever be successful as an artist. But at the same time, if a small band approaches me, I never go, oh, well, I've worked with Corpse Grinder and Cradle of Filth and all these other sort of bands, so you're not worth my time. If
Yeah.
an excited young kid comes to me with a project that sounds fun, I still get buzzing over that and I'm proud to work with them. And I think it's nice to be in that mindset rather than thinking you're too good or too
Yeah.
successful for anybody because I suppose it keeps you grounded and keeps the love of it alive rather than treating it as a job or treating it as um a, a, a ladder that you have to climb because I'm
Yeah.
happy. I'm
Well,
happy.
you're
I wish
also you're
more
also
band.
part of that. You're part of the scene now. You're part of, like Ed Repka was part of that scene back in the day. You're now sort of carrying that torch, and it's keeping that look, but it's also kind of keeping the concept of somebody can, there's somebody out there who does, bands albums, and you get into their stuff and you see their stuff on another band's album cover and you think, oh, that might, so it's that tradition that you're keeping going as well, and you and being part of the scene as somebody who does cover art. That's that's really cool, because some things never change.
Absolutely. And I'd love to still make music, but I do occasionally, but not on any scale that's sort of popular. So it's really nice to be involved with all these people who are in bands that are, doing well or at the ground floor, just to sort of feel a part of it. Because I think the most exciting time in your life is when you don't know what can happen and you're just starting out your first bands and it could go anywhere and you kind of see the slightly bigger or better gigs or 10 people turn up as opposed to five. And I still kind of get that sense of excitement working with like the smaller bands who nobody heard of, hoping that, maybe they'll make it one day. And I don't know, it's just really nice to be a part of a scene. And I feel so lucky that by and large, almost everybody that I've met, I know there's tons of toxic people within all music industries, but pretty much everybody that I work with or have spoken to along the way has been lovely. And that is, I don't know, that's a really rewarding thing to sort of make long-lasting
Yeah.
friendships and well with people because well, the collaborative process is so enjoyable, really, when you sort of get to that's the same with talking to yourself. It's so lovely to talk to somebody who's got same interests as myself. And
Yeah, it's but again, I think, rightly or wrongly, if you've got somebody who is getting in touch with you as regards album art, you know a certain part of their history already, because what's bringing them to you is what brought you to doing what you're doing. So it's almost like it's it's inescapable that you're going to deal with like-minded, cool people, because their journey is going to be somehow similar to yours as well.
absolutely, and you've completely nailed it there because I wondered a few years ago. It's like when I started to get bands that I really liked already, I was like, why am I being asked by bands that I like to work for them? How has this happened? But then you realize it's like, well, I like them because of a certain thing that they like. And because they like that, they like the same stuff as I like. And you
Yeah.
just end up finding yourself. So it's not really a coincidence or some sort of stroke of luck or fluke or miracle. It's actually just because it's like-minded people that through I guess the power of the internet and what have you, get to discover who everyone is, and that's really nice, really. Because if you've got the same interests of people, so whether it's sense of humor, art style, or what have you, you end up getting on really well with them.
You
Um,
do. You do. And you know what, mate? That's the perfect sentiment to leave it on. You've just encompassed that all brilliantly. Um, Look, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it, Dan. And also I can't wait to see what you do with our album and a £50 budget. Um,
I'll do. I'll take it.
but seriously, man, thank you very much.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much for having me on. It's yeah, a real honor. So lovely chatting to you.
Pleasure, mate.